Hello and welcome to Just Films and That. This is the podcast where we talk about films we think might be underrated, underseen, or perhaps we just wanted to talk about them. I'm the host for this week, Josh Hallam, and I'm joined, as ever, by you-know-who, Alice Oliver.
Oh,
Alice?
I like that now.
You know who.
Yeah,
Voldemort.
you know it. You know it. Here I am.
Yeah, you know it. All of you know. You know.
It.
It's not changed. It's not changed for,
It's not.
2 years.
I'm sorry about
that. Yeah. How you doing? You okay?
I'm very, very well, thank you, Josh. How are you?
Yes, I'm very good, thank you. We're coming into the summer, so it's getting a little bit brighter outside.
Indeed, finally. Feels like that was a never-ending winter.
I know. Occasionally I might venture outside for a little leg stretch.
Yeah, with the factor 50 on, of course.
Yeah. Rather than walking from my house to my car to work to the car to house, which is the standard winter trajectory. But anyway, we're very excited, aren't we, Alice?
We are indeed.
Because we're joined by another fantastic guest.
Another one.
We keep getting them. John Aggasild, how are you doing? You okay?
Hello, thank you so much for having me on. Hello.
Very welcome. Are you well?
I'm very well. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm very excited to talk about the film.
Yes. Well, without further ado, let's talk about the film then, because I forgot to do a random question. So here we are.
I'll answer a random question.
Go on. If you can ask one off the top of your head if you want, and we'll try and answer it.
I'd ask Alice if she has nothing better to do than do a podcast with this slicker.
Yeah,
that is correct. I do have nothing better to do. You hit the nail on the head right there. I have no hobbies. I have no friends. I have no interests. So here I am.
I remember when I asked Alice to do this podcast, and I texted her and said, "Are you doing anything?" And she went, "Nah." and that was it.
Well, you're the perfect candidate.
Anyway, shall we move on to talk about this week's film, which is, of course, Thunder Road. So, John, you chose this. So tell the guys at home a little bit, in sort of 30 seconds or less, what Thunder Road's about, and then tell us, why did you pick it for this podcast?
Thunder Road is about a policeman called Jim, who at the start of the film loses his mum, and he is getting divorced, and the death of his mum begins this downward trajectory for him. And it's him sort of failing to face the grieving process and how that affects everything else in his life.
Yeah, that's about right. Yeah, it's sort of a bit. It's one of those films that sort of it's about a thing, but it's a bit light on plot, as in not in a bad way. It's just that's how it's made. So if you haven't seen it, spoiler warnings, although there's not really anything to spoil, I wouldn't say. So John, why did you pick this one? Is it underrated? Is it underseen? Do you just want to talk about it?
All three, I think. I haven't seen. So Jim Cummings this is his first movie. It's and he's made 3 movies and made loads of shorts, and I've only seen one of his shorts, which is called "It's All Right, It's Okay," which is excellent, and you should check that out. Listeners should check that out as well. But he made a short called Thunder Road, which was effectively the first scene of this movie, which I haven't seen. The thing about short movies, right? If I can just expand to this,
please do.
Come from this background is that unless you're in like the film industry or unless you're like a filmmaker, they're really hard to. I just have no idea what's going on in the short film world, but they're great. They're super great, and they're so good, easy to watch because they're literally short, and they can just do other things that features can, I guess. But that's just as an aside. Like I know Vimeo has like. If you go on Vimeo, they sometimes find like shorts that they recommend, like staff picks, and I think that was Thunder Road was initially like a staff pick, and so it's the first scene, which is him giving a eulogy, but I hadn't seen that short, and why did I pick it? I've seen this film quite a lot now.
Right, wow.
I watched it today, and today was the 4th time I've seen this film.
Oh, wow.
What I love about it is, I love I'm a stand-up comedian. I love comedies, and obviously because I do stand-up, I'm a monologist.
Mm.
I really like that. But what I love in comedies is obviously, or situation comedies, which is what I first loved, is those worlds that you go to. But what I am really, really attracted to is in comedies when there are monologues in them that do world building in monologues. Excellent. Like David Brent in The Office, like Alan Partridge, like Rob Brydon in like Marion and Jeff.
Yeah.
Or Alan Bennett's Talking Heads.
Mm.
They build these worlds so well by just having one person in one setting, and I think that is such an incredible skill of like writing and acting, writing and performing. And Jim Cummings does that in some of the best I've ever seen. I think, and that's where this film starts. And I think it's just so funny and so deeply sad as well. And I was just absolutely gobsmacked by it.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of really interesting points you've made there. The first one, I think, just to go back to the world building with monologues, that's something I love as well, because it's almost one step away or a halfway house between a film and a book, because it's just a character talking. So it's almost like an audiobook, but they're just talking to camera. So you don't see anything. So everything they say, you're imagining. So if you take, for example, the first one that popped into my head when he said about world building monologues outside of sitcoms in a film context would be something like the Watch monologue from Pulp Fiction. And if you think about that, Christopher Walken gives this big long monologue about the history of this watch, and it's just him talking to camera. So the whole time you're thinking about the story of this watch and where it's been and how he got it and all that sort of stuff. And I think there's a real engagement to be had and a real sort of satisfaction from a film when something like that is done in a film. So I think you're right, and I think that is something that this film does. And the other thing, just to follow on, is that's a really great point. I've never really given much thought to that about short films. They're hard to find. Like, unless you go to festivals or seek them out. So maybe that's something to be said for like the next big innovation in streaming. I'm surprised there's not a short films we love on Netflix. Or short, because even the closest you get to it is there's some on Disney Plus, because all the Pixar films have associated shorts, and there's some Marvel stuff. Obviously, that's completely different to an independent short film, but they're still short films. You know what I mean? So no one's going, do you know who needs our support? Pixar. but I'm surprised Disney haven't gone, oh, there's something here, so let's take that. Considering Disney's first major thing was Steamboat Willie, which in itself is a short film. I'm surprised they haven't gone, let's extrapolate that out and let's bring more attention to short films we love from filmmakers. We've talked on this podcast before about a little bit about short films. So, for example, one thing we've talked about before is like both of us have at times in our film watching lives, if you like, picked a certain actor and be like, oh, I'm going to watch like everything. I'm going to watch like everything they've done. So I, at one time, before he was massive, when he'd just done Bronson, I got really into Tom Hardy, and he did a short film called something like Sergeant Slaughter, My Big Brother. It's something like that, but it's a 10-minute film, and that's on Vimeo or one of those websites, and that's really good. And it's, that's the sort of thing where I think if people found out Tom Hardy was in it and it was only 10 minutes, there's a real draw, I think, to what people see as almost like extended, really short stories. You've only got to look at the way that sometimes they'll make an advert and they'll make a short version of the advert and then a long version of the advert. And like, for example, again, straight off the top of the dome, the Belvedere vodka advert, that's almost like with Daniel Craig, it's almost like a little short comedy dance piece, isn't it? Like, you could watch that and be like, I don't know what this is advertising. Just watching Daniel Craig do his thing, right? So I think that's a really good point, that this film came from a short film, and it is. So I haven't seen the short film, but I do think I do believe, like you've said, it's pretty much just the opening sequence until the woman asks him to leave his own mum's funeral. So that's what it's about, and that's why you picked it, John. So let's get stuck into talking about it then. So Alice, had you seen this one before?
I hadn't seen it. I hadn't heard of it. I had no idea about any of it. I didn't know anyone who was in it. I've never heard anything about it. I didn't recognize anything. Like, it was a completely, maybe or maybe not the most, because we've had a few obscure picks on here before, but one of the most obscure for sure, where I just have had no bit of knowledge about anything to do with it. No expectations whatsoever. I think maybe when I heard the title, I thought it might be like a almost like a comic book type. It does
sound like that, doesn't it? It does sound like it could be like an action film or something like that. But obviously the title's taken, if you don't know, from the Bruce Springsteen song.
Well, I know now because of the film.
But the title,
the film told me.
I meant the listeners at home, Alice. So no expectations going in. Because even when you picked it, John, I was fairly certain it would be this one. But there is like a 50s Robert Mitchum or something like that film called Thunder. And I did have to go, it's not the like mid-50s one, is it? And you were like, no.
It could have been.
But even then Alice asked me that. We were both looking for it to watch, and it was like, because obviously you don't want to watch the wrong thing. So no expectations going in then.
Yeah, which is always enjoyable. So that was fun. What about you? Had you seen it? Had you heard of it?
I had seen it before.
Oh, you had?
So I remember it coming out. I remember it coming out, and I think possibly being reviewed by, or reading a review or hearing a review somewhere, probably Kermode or Mayo or something like that, and it being really highly spoke of. So I sought it out and watched it. Now, when I first watched it, I remember thinking, yeah, it's fine, yeah, it's good, yeah. But I had a bit of a different reaction this time, which we'll come to. But let's get stuck into it first then. So, John, before we give you our thoughts, what do you like about this film? Lay it on us. What do you like about Thunder Road, the one from 2018, not the 50s one?
I think that, the main thing is just Jim Cummings' performance. I think is incredible, and I think that's what sold the short to get, and it's what sells the film. And his crying, he cries like real people cry, he cries like real people cry, and that you're trying not to do it.
Ugly crying, yeah.
Ugly crying. It always annoys me in films when people cry and they just let tears roll down to their neck, and I'm like, I would be wiping that away almost instantly. It's so funny. I think there's so many great lines in it. It's got so many great scenes as well. That it's just got great scenes. It moves along really nicely. It's only an hour and a half as well, which
we like that.
I wanted to.
We like a 90-minute here, don't we, Alice?
Yeah. It's hard to find, and for it being a comedy, like a lot of comedies are shorter, but also I'm sorry that it was a bit more on the obscure side, but it was on Netflix because I was thinking about picking a film that you could access as well, and it was on Netflix for like about a year.
I think that's where I watched it.
That's really thoughtful of you to try and pick something that we could easily access, because even I haven't done that at times, and I'm on the podcast, and I'll often pick things that you can't find anywhere.
Yeah, I love rooting around for a DVD that's now 10 quid because it's not being made anymore.
Oh no, I'm sorry.
But the first time I watched it, I thought it was so funny. The first time I watched it was just I watched it illegally, and then the second time I watched it legally. I went to see it in the cinema, and there was a Q&A with Jim Cummings afterwards. This makes for me pirating this movie, and I was hit more with the sad moments and the emotion of it, and I think it really favors rewatching. This is a spoil. We can do spoilers.
We can. Do spoilers.
This is a spoiler zone.
Yeah. But the weird thing is, though, that as I feel like I've watched it quite a few times, and I get more and more each time from it, or still something from it. That I almost don't want to there's spoiling like plot, but there's almost like spoiling what somebody could get from a second time watching it.
Yeah.
Interesting.
You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
during lockdown, I got so into really into the Arrival movie podcast, but the Rewatchables podcast, which is excellent. And I think that there's such a value in rewatching. There's so much value in rewatching movies. I assume I agree because you are big film fans, and
absolutely, yeah.
And this really favors that. You get as much out as you put in. I think with this, and with a lot of really good movies, I think that goes. The same goes for that.
Absolutely, yeah. It's like, yeah, it's funny, isn't it? It's like going to the gym. You get out of it what you put into it. No, I agree. And so funnily, because of the point you made there about it being about rewatching films, I mentioned there a little bit about how I had seen it before and I had a bit of a different reaction to it this time. And I don't know if this will be a surprise to you, but my reaction this time was that I enjoyed it a lot more. I think
I thought
because
you might have done.
Yeah, because I'd already seen it. I think I was looking at it with a different eye, and I think a lot of films you have to watch at least twice to appreciate, because the first time you're taking stuff in and you're trying to remember what's going on. So the second time, once you know what happens, you can be like, oh right, so now I know that this is coming. How did they get to that point? So that sort of thing. So I definitely agree that there's merit to rewatching films. I mean, we've talked before, like we've covered Underseen, we've covered films obviously for years now, and there's been ones where we've picked it because we saw it once, and there's ones where we've gone, I've seen this 50 times.
Yeah.
There's been films where we've gone, I have rewatched it for the podcast, but I didn't really need to because I've pretty much committed it to memory.
I know it like the back of my hand, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like Alice with Grease 2.
Yeah, one of the greatest films ever made.
Yeah, certainly. Well, it's a film we did. Anyway, Alice, so what did you like about the film then? What did you think, first of all, and then tell us what you like. If you liked anything, hoping you did, though.
So that'd be pretty bad if I didn't like anything about it. My general overview of it is that it is a very effective and compelling blend of comedy and tragedy that at times is as brutal as it is beautiful. And I think it's a terrific example of how less can be more. There's no flash, there's no glamour, there's barely any music. The mise-en-scène is quite simple and basic, and yet it feels so full, and like every moment is just brimming with feeling and emotion. I loved it. I thought it was excellent. I thought it was such a good film. Like you've already touched on there, Jim Cummings is just wonderful. He feels so authentic and raw, and I feel like he knows how to make a character feel like a real person and apply techniques that help you believe that this person existed before the film started and will go on after it ends. For instance, whenever he starts crying, and I've already touched on when he starts crying, but he gets about halfway through like the first sob and then he stops himself abruptly, and that indicates to me that he's spent a great deal of his life trying to repress his emotions. So then you start asking, well, why is he doing that then? Did something happen to him as a child? What were his parents like? And all that. And this happened a lot throughout the film, where I would find myself trying to dig deeper and asking, well, why is this person like this? Or how did we end up here? So then that means you start considering the world that this film takes place in and everything that's happened in it, which I think really enhances the realness of the whole world and the people in it.
Yeah. I mean, I completely agree. I mean, same as you, Alice. I loved it. Like, I remember the first time I liked it, thought it was fine, but this time I enjoyed it so much more. And I think, let's be honest, I think the highlight for this, probably for all three of us, is Jim Cummings in some way. It's helped by the fact that he wrote, directed, edited, and starred in the film. So, his fingerprints are very much all over this. If you don't like it, you very much don't like his style. And similar to you, John, I've not seen anything else he's done. So I've not seen that short. I've only seen this. I've heard him interviewed, and he always comes across very well. I know I always think it's weird that he doesn't sound anything like Jim in this film and doesn't have the mustache and stuff like that. So let's talk a little bit about Jim Cummings. So for me, his performance is mesmerizing in places, because obviously he's written it. So there's a difference between acting dialogue you've written and acting dialogue someone else has written. And the strength of that are testament here, because sometimes I think it must be easy as a writer and director to get in your head a little bit and think, I don't want to put myself front and center. So quite often when people have directed stuff and they put themselves in it, they're not the main character. They're usually just in it, but they're not the main character or whatever. If you think of like some of, I don't know, George Clooney's films or whatever, he's directed some, but he's not often the main character. Whereas in this, he is. And because he's written it, because it's all come from his head, you can see that creation of the character of Jim from inception through to it, you know, execution. And it's all summed up for me in that opening, because what he does is he gives himself these big monologues. There's at least 3 in the film. There's the first one, which is the opening. There's one where he's being suspended or sacked as a police officer. There's another one as well, but I can't quite think of. But the highlight for me is that opening. I mean, if you haven't seen the film, I'd urge you to just seek out the opening and watch the first 15 minutes, because it's the most sort of intricately choreographed and written and performed piece of dialogue that's almost a mixture between a dance and a monologue. It is very much a monologue, but there is some... and I don't mean because he dances in it. What I mean is...
But he does dance in it.
Yeah,
he does dance in it.
Every nuance of his facial expression is obviously must be in the script, or he's come up with himself and directed it himself. So like, it's awkward, it's funny, it's heartbreaking, like lots of good comedy. It's completely rooted in tragedy. He's given this speech at his mum's funeral where he's planned a dance because she loved dance, and the music doesn't work, so he gives a monologue. So whilst he's doing the monologue, he's just a man desperately trying to keep his shit together and not lose it. And when he's doing it all the way through, he's hesitating and completely changes subject. So he's like, I love my mum and she did this. And then he'll like look at someone and be like, you all right? Thanks for coming.
Yeah.
It's proper. And it's almost the perfect mix between stylized and real. On one hand, you think this is so real, a man trying to keep it all together. And on the other hand, you think this is not real. But the blend is such that it it's just perfect, I thought. So I the way he keeps interrupting himself and stuff like that, I just thought it was pitch perfect in its delivery. So is there anything else for you, Alice? Like, did you think it was funny? Is there a particular big monologue that stuck out to you?
I mean, I did think it was very funny, and the funniest moment for me that really made me laugh out loud was that he's dropping his daughter off at school in the morning, and he goes to drive away, but he sees her like link up with a boy, like I think she like links arms, and he just slams the brakes on immediately as if he's horrified. But then the moment just ends, like it's just this really tiny little moment that just happens. But that really made me laugh, because I was like, it's so in amongst like all this kind of chaos and all that, he's just a dad like worried about his little girl sort of thing, and the thing that he's worried about is like this young boy
like
in school, like this harmless just like cute little fella sort of thing. So no, I did think it was really funny, and obviously the comedy is only emphasized because of the tragic elements of it. But as well as that, I really enjoyed some of the techniques used to capture the mood and create feeling. So like you said, Josh, there's a lot of monologues in there, but there's also a lot of really long shots without any cuts, and obviously the most prominent one being the opening that we've discussed there, because that sort of starts it's like a medium wide, and it zooms in very slowly as he's giving the eulogy until we're sort of right up and close and personal with him, and it just flips so abruptly between being so funny and so sad. So as the viewer, you are just on the bit of this roller coaster, and he's crying in front of all these people at a funeral, but now he's dancing to no music, and it's so awkward and weird, and it's just like this bizarre like landscape that you're seeing. You're also left hanging in the silence a lot in this film as well, which I do really appreciate. So you might be hanging in an awkward moment, or something quite traumatic may have happened, and it feels like a lot actually happens in the silence, which is obviously part down, I think, to the actors in terms of things like their delivery and body language, because instead of it making a scene feel like empty or slow or quiet, you feel awkward, or you feel sad, or you feel thoughtful. And then just bouncing off that as well, so relating to the silences, there is so little non-diegetic music in this, and even the bits we do hear are more like noises than songs or a score. And I like that the film hasn't felt the need to fill it with like a cheesy soundtrack, and instead you just get these really peculiar, almost unnerving and quite ominous sounds that are played whenever something particularly dramatic happens, but they're so infrequently used, which is just so different from most films which tend to use a score or a soundtrack very heavily. And I'm I do like to critique a film's soundtrack or score one way or the other. Sometimes it's really, really great. Sometimes it's absolutely terrible. And in this, it was just almost non-existent. And I was like, you're trusting your audience, you're trusting your performers, and you're trusting the quality of the film there to just be like, no, this is what we mean. Here are the feelings that are being expressed. We don't now need to play a Coldplay song to help you know that, oh, this is a sad moment. Do you know what I mean? Nothing against Coldplay.
Because for me, it was missing Coldplay. No, I love the bit. I love the bit where. So the song Thunder Road isn't in it, is it? But the bit at the end where he's going to take his daughter to move away, and he's crying at one point. He goes, "Oh God, it's the song."
Yeah,
realizes it's the song. The story of the song is what he's doing with his daughter. But no, I like that. And back to your point there, I love the long shots as well. It doesn't always work. But it really worked in this because they often build to a bit of a crescendo. Like they sort of almost go up to a crescendo and back down again and back. And every time it goes back up, it goes higher up, like imagine your typical graph or whatever, like that sort of thing. So I like that, but also there was a lot of calm to frantic and frantic to calm editing, so that had a real impact. So the bit for me that where I really noticed was the opening's brilliant, but there is another monologue later on where he has lost the custody case for his daughter and he goes to the police station to confront his friend who said he would give him the lawyer to help him to get his daughter back, and they essentially have like a bit of a scrappy fight, and then there's a big argument, and it leads him going into this big monologue where he's basically taking his police uniform off to give it back, and it's the most sort of cringe but dark but funny, but again it's almost like the first scene but dialed up even more because he's hit another point of he's almost hit rock bottom at this point, and he's just desperate to get all this off his chest. But at that moment there's a bit where it just stops and he realizes he's holding his gun.
Oh yeah, that was good. That wasn't it?
And it's so like
good.
Fuck, like he's taking his gun out without realizing he's taking his gun out, basically.
Yeah, it's like and that it's yeah, it just is like this could really go either way.
Yeah,
this could really, really go either way, and this is scary. This guy is scaring his colleagues. When they seem like, you know, when there's been an established friendship or there's there, and we're like, oh, it's not ugly. It's just scary.
But quite real as well. You know, like in that sense.
In a word, in this film is not stuff that you would paint as scary bits in movies, like you would think a horror movie. It's stuff that you actually like fear, like somebody have it, like an unhinged person having a gun, or when his partner, you know, there's like I love the music in it, but much like, you know, the long shots, you barely notice it. And I think to go back to, you know, briefly on, you know, long shots, I think in this century, apart from like stuff like Rope or something, like they're really at the forefront, and it's like, oh, like this is the thing that the camera won't cut, and it's such a big deal, and a lot of the stuff kind of gets lost in it, whereas you don't notice the camera in this, and the music only soundtracks like montages and the two like action scenes, like the police work, action scenes, which the editing is great in that they start with like bangs or like a clatter or something, and it just like sort of wakens you up a bit from like the silence or like, you know, the gaps in conversation. But like the other sort of scary moment is, you know, when he's hit rock bottom, like you've said, and he's lost his mom, he's lost his daughter. And the other thing is that, you know, he says that when he's getting sacked, and he's like, you know, my mom died, I've lost my daughter. And it's like, these are like, you know, things that catch in your throat. Like when you are hitting rock bottom or something bad is happening to you, you don't want to speak the thing that is happening to you. And he does that because he has nowhere else to go. And whilst a lot of the dialogue in this is flowery in terms of it being very extra, like it's the song, or talking about, oh, it's the song, or oh, should we call the manufacturer, or something like that. It also has like, I lost my daughter today. And then it also has like, this is what you get, like really like stuff that isn't really clear. But then the sort of other sort of scary moment is that, when his partner comes to visit him when he's hit rock bottom, and his partner is like, calls his wife and he's like, can you come and pick me up in a couple of hours? I'm just here with him. And he's like, I love you so, so much. We're so lucky that basically we aren't.
We're not this.
Yeah, we're not this. And we all have those moments when we're comforting friends, or we see people who are unfortunate that we're like, thank God. And that's part of the whole thing of, appreciating what you've got whilst it's there, which is what goes back to him and the eulogy that he's given his mum, and it's full of regret.
Okay, then. So we'll move on to perhaps talking about things we didn't like about the film, or things we might change about the film. Now, I don't think this is going to be the longest section we've ever done. Who wants to go first? John or Alice? Who wants to go first? Is there anything?
Go. I've got two things.
Go on, let's hear them. Is there anything you didn't like? And then John can defend them.
First one, Jim spits a lot.
Oh yeah, you hate spitting, don't you?
I don't like spitting.
That's a bad habit.
Yeah.
So
I don't think there's much to defend, to be honest.
Definitely, it seemed appropriate for his character, but I didn't like looking at it. It's not going to ruin it for me, and it doesn't mean that I wouldn't watch it again or whatever. But something I noticed. And the other thing was, and this was the main offender, and it's really, really small in comparison to some of the things we talk about on here, but the font that they use for the end credits is fucking terrible. And then they all transition. They use a crossfade to transition from page to page. So you have one page with the cast on, and then there's a crossfade, so it transitions to the editors or the showrunners, whatever it is. And I was like, this is terrible. And it looked like a student film. But that was it. And that is obviously a very small offender, but I noticed it, so I had to make a note of it, of course.
Can you defend the fact that Alice doesn't like spitting or shit end credits, John? Is that possible?
No, I think credits are great, and they're there so that you can clearly see people's names.
Yeah, that is what credits are.
Think? Yeah,
I think it's supposed to be like funeral program.
It is a bit like that. It's like it's very sort of swirly fancy, the writing, isn't it?
Especially your point of, I'd not thought about that, of them fading into one another, is such a good point, that they're almost illegible. The spitting, I don't like spitting. But a point about that is that there's a couple of things that are so cyclical in this film, like they go and speak to this guy when they're working, and the guy's dancing in the parking lot, and he's thrashing around, and he's spitting, and he says, they don't know, and they're like, who doesn't know? What are you talking about? He does exactly the same thing. He's in a parking lot, he's been thrashing around at a funeral, he's spitting, and he's saying they don't know. And I think that's just, we're all just a couple of bad times away from rock bottom. And I think that's like the spitting is kind of to show that, although he does spit, he spits in the church. He's spitting like, sorry. And then he says it's a bad habit himself. The character says
he knows. He knows.
And that the whole film is about, knowing, being self-aware of the bad things about you, that he's so crushed that he's passed on potentially, dyslexia, or that his daughter's like slower at reading, like he's had those struggles with. He talked about, his mum recording books for him to audiobook because he had dyslexia when he was in school, which he then he said she must have spent so long doing that, and then he stayed up all night doing the hand clap bit, which is probably
That's cute.
the second best scene in the movie, the hand slap bit. And she's like, oh, okay. And it's like, that's the way that he's like reasserted dominance in his place, and he's like, she does that and she's like, okay. And he's like, about we get in the car and I take you to school. Does that sound good? And she's like, yeah. And then she walks off and then the phone rings and he's like, he's like, I'm just managing to hold on to these things. But the thing that hit me the most was that it's like the faults that you pass on to people are faults, for want of a better word, that your parents might pass on to you, and he's worried about that. Then the film turns around at the end when he's been pulled over and he's like trying to get in his car, which he's locked himself out of, and then he's like, can I get your stick? And that's the first time he like asks for help from anybody. And then that's when he like busts the car open, and then then he goes to see his ex-wife, and then the film starts to turn around, and it's just this sort of like almost, it's a bit symbolic because it's such a small action, but and that's not a critique. That's not a critique of the movie. I just think that's why it's so much more than just cringe comedy. But that is also how I would pitch it to somebody. And there's so much to be taken from it. The only criticism I would have of him is that in the second movie that he made, which is called Wolf of Snow Hollow, he plays another policeman. I listened to him on a podcast, and somebody asked him about that, which I was like, oh, I'm really glad they asked him about that, because the film came out in 2020, in the middle of the the sort of BLM movement, and they're like, why are you playing policeman like 2 movies in a row? And he was just like, well, I think it's the ultimate sort of like person or like occupation where you can have the sort of like good, like it's the most sort of like, it's a person where you can hang the most like morals on.
So polarizing, isn't it? And
yeah,
and also it's I think the thing is that the people will always be drawn to things about police in TV, film, whatever, because they are in such a sort of almost unique position in society. So I think it just draws out stories, doesn't it?
But yeah. I'm really glad that you enjoyed it, Alice.
Okay, then, so we will move on then to talking about the critical reception and the box office and stuff like that, and then we'll see if it is underseen and underrated. As John said, he picked it for all 3 reasons. Now, we can't say whether he's right or wrong because he just wanted to talk about it. That's not a measurable thing because John just wanted to talk about it. But we can look at the critical reception and we can look at the box office. So, Alice, do you want to have a go at how it did critically and how it did commercially, or what do we think? What do we think?
I feel like it must have done okay critically because it is a good film. Like,
well, you'd be surprised.
Do you know what I mean? Oh, really? Okay. Well,
no, as in you'd be surprised about how many films critics don't like that we think.
That's true. That
should be better.
And the shit that they do like. So, I mean, for me, this is easily an 8 into the 8s. And I reckon it probably got about that. So I reckon I'll say a low 8. I reckon it got maybe an 8.1 or an 81. In terms of box office, I mean, probably didn't do that well. I can't imagine it was like in the Odeons and the Cineworlds. Do you know what I mean? I reckon it got a pretty limited release, and I reckon not many people saw it. I don't think the budget was particularly big, so whether or not it was successful in that way, then, if it got all its money back, then great. But I don't. Like, I hadn't heard a whisper of this film, nothing, until John picked it. So,
okay, well let's have a look then. So, interesting with the scores, actually. Interesting to see what you think of it here, because we've got a score that's quite surprised. We've got 2 scores that are quite surprising in their own ways. So on IMDb, at the time of recording, it gets 7 out of 10.
Okay. You know what? I would expect that from the IMDb lot. Okay, they don't know quality when it comes up and knocks them in the face. Do you know what I mean?
But over on Rotten Tomatoes, the audience give it 91%, and the critics give it, and I think this is our second highest ever score, 97%.
Whoa!
And I think the only thing that's done better than that is probably Meet Me in St. Louis, which got 100%.
Yeah. Oh, wowzers!
So
there we go. Oh,
overall,
well done, Jim. Hey, well done, Jim. The critics liked it. The critics liked it.
How did it lose 3%? So that means if you average those out, it's 86% or 8.6 out of 10. Is that appropriately rated? Is it underrated? Is it overrated? What would you say, Alice?
I would go with appropriate for that. I think it's a brilliant film, terrific execution, the script, the acting, and just not like something I've seen too often either. And I think I've said this before, like when you are watching these, big, loud, action-packed, Hollywood blockbuster type things, sometimes it's nice to just watch something like this that is just about raw human emotion done really well. So yeah, I reckon I would say appropriately rated. I wouldn't say that's underrated though. John might have other ideas.
Well, before we move on to the box office then, John, 8.6 or 86, what do we think?
What do I think that's unfair? I don't know. The thing is about ratings and things like that. I try not to pay too much attention to it, but I totally understand why people would use that as a thing. Are either of you on Letterboxd?
I'm on it. I don't really use it. So we don't with ours. The reason we use those two is because we average them out to give a general consensus about the general reception. So it's not. I don't really pay attention myself to scores. I pay attention to like things I like the idea of. But obviously for us, we have to judge what makes something rated in a certain way. So that's what we use.
I get why it's useful if you were talking about films in a journalistic way on a podcast. I think the eights, if I'm quantifying that as 80%, which is 4 stars and up, then that's fine by me. I have put this as 5 stars on my Letterboxd, so that I use Letterboxd religiously, and Jim Cummings uses it as well, because for me, like, I don't get too bogged down in it. I just try and like go with my gut. But I can't explain what a 5-star movie is because there's no such thing as like a perfect movie. But for me, I always say that 5 stars is a feeling. And this gave me that. The
5-star feeling, the Friday feeling.
That 5-star feeling. You'll see that in your head next time. 5 stars is a feeling. Okay. It's not,
I like it.
But yeah, that's fair. That's fair to me.
We're saying it's appropriately rated. However, you also said it's underseen. At the time, according to Box Office Mojo, now it's a fairly sort of low budget indie film, so finding the exact box office is difficult. But according to Box Office Mojo, which is usually fairly accurate, it grossed just over $450,000 worldwide.
Wow,
so it didn't, if you think about, I don't know what its budget was. It probably wasn't massive, but if you think about, how many people there are in the world and how much money it could have made. For me, I'd say that's underseen, because also I think more people should see it. What would you say, Alice?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that says to me that it did get a very limited release, and it was probably out in like 1 or 2 cinemas over in the States at one point. But yeah, definitely underseen. And people should definitely watch it. If you're into films, guys, and I know you are, you should give this one a watch, for sure.
So, John, Thunder Road, underseen, appropriately rated, and you did want to pick it, which is immeasurable, as we've already said. Happy with that? Happy with that, yeah?
Yeah.
Thank you very much for coming on. So the guys at home, obviously, you're a stand-up comedian. Where can they look out for your stuff? What have you got going on? Where can they check you out?
So I'm a stand-up comedian based in Glasgow, but I gig in Glasgow and Edinburgh and around Scotland as well. I have just... in February, I released a stand-up comedy special on YouTube, which was a film of my solo show that I did at the Fringe last year, which is called Welcome Back, and which I billed and advertised as a romantic stand-up comedy show. So it's a solo stand-up comedy show, but it's a rom-com told through stand-up comedy.
Right.
If you like rom-coms and you like stand-up comedy, then you like my show. It's about how me and my partner met. And yeah, I love rom-coms. So you can watch that on YouTube. So if you just type in John Aggasild, which is Aggassild, Welcome Back, you'll find it there.
Yeah, we'll make sure we'll put out links to that when this comes out. We'll put it in the episode description as well. So scroll down to the episode description. You'll be able to find links to the YouTube and all John's social media as well. What are your social media handles, John, so they can check you out?
Jaggassild on everything. Jaggassild.
Excellent. John Aggasild, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, there we go. Another one in the bag. Underseen, appropriately rated. And do you know what? I think it's safe to say we both say give that a watch. If you like your films, you like your dark comedies, your Coen brothers, I think you'll probably quite like Thunder Road. So give it a watch. It's well worth your time. And it's only 90 minutes as well.
Only 90 minutes, guys. You know how much Josh loves that.
We love a 90-minute here. We love a 90-minute. Under 2 hours and I'm happy, Alice. You can't tell a story in 2 hours then. You know,
you failed. Then you failed as a writer.
Then tell it in 2 parts as 2 hours. Anyway, we'll be back next week with another episode in your ears, so keep an eye out for that. If you'd like to get in touch with us, the email address is filmsandthatpod@gmail.com. We're on all the social medias. If you just search for Just Films and That on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram, you'll find us. We're always putting stuff out there, so give us a follow. And we are on Patreon as well. So if you want to get episodes a day early, extended episodes, stuff like that, there's a couple of little tiers over there, so feel free to check them out. Any support, any extra stuff you could chuck our ways are massively appreciated, but we do of course just appreciate you listening and supporting and following us and stuff like that. We're on the television as well, aren't we, Alice?
We are indeed. We are on the local TV network every Friday from 6 p.m. So if you live in Birmingham, Bristol, Leeds, Liverpool, or the northeast of England, you can find us on Channel 7 on Freeview. Or if you live in North Wales or South Wales, you can find us on Channel 8 on Freeview. We also put all the episodes up on Daily Motion. So if you type in Just Films and That, you'll be able to find us there. But that's every Friday from 6 p.m. on your local TV network.
Yes, lots of ways to see us, hear us, follow us, and all that jazz. And as ever, thank you very much for listening. We'll see you next week. It's goodbye from me. Cheerio!
Bye!